And it is a beautiful day and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, as usual. My name is Steve Moak, and this is The Unlicensed Counselor. I am so grateful to have everybody tuning in today, listening wherever you're at. And again, this is actually available on video as well, too. If you go to Star Worldwide Networks, you can actually, not that anybody necessarily needs to see me in action, but if you choose to or want to have a different way to consume this podcast, by all means, it's out on video as well, too. What an interesting day I have already had. I'm just going to start teasing. I am working on a project that is all around drug prevention. I've actually co-founded a nonprofit with a group of individuals here in the Valley who are building out a nationwide drug prevention campaign. We're very excited to be able to kind of come out of stealth mode here in the near future. And actually today, the topic I want to talk about is prevention. We just did a big video shoot this morning as we're kind of gearing up for this campaign. I'm going to do some press, media, and PR. But, you know, while prevention is top of mind, I think it's a worthwhile topic to bring to the Unlicensed Counselor podcast as well, too. So there's some really interesting stuff. And as always, going to take a question that we got submitted to us as well, too. But before we do that, want to always give a big shout out and thank you to our sponsors. First and foremost, our friends at ShareTech. You know, ShareTech is the most comprehensive drug test available on the market. It is a confirmation screen. That means it is done by a lab and they detect over 100 substances. Go to betterdrugtest.com, pick up one of these tests. This test, by the way, is used by some of the leading treatment centers in the entire country. So if you don't believe me, you know, the founder of the company, believe some of the treatment centers that we work with, because obviously they wouldn't trust their results to anything less than the best, and ShareTech certainly checks that box. So go to betterdrugtest.com, pick that up. Obviously, our friends at Easy Sheets as well, too, whether you're a short-term rental host or a sheet connoisseur as well. My suggestion, as always, try the Carry Aloha. I like the white. We professionally clean them, press them, ship them to your door. You can change them out for the summer, change them out for the season. Want a temperature-controlled sheet? We got you. Want some flannel sheets at the wintertime? We got you, too. So highly recommend. Go to easysheets.club. Check that out. And then again, go to the Unlicensed Counselor as well, too, .com. You can always submit questions there, which some people do. Most people follow us on Twitter. Instagram is primarily where we're doing a lot of this, and even Facebook as well, too. We're building up a nice little following is there. But if you want to book time with me, the Unlicensed Counselor, I'm happy to share in a little more detail and listen to kind of what's going on in your life and see if I can provide some feedback and solution-focused counseling. I was at my therapist this week, so, you know, trust me when I tell you, I practice what I preach, and, you know, therapy is an important part of, I think, overall well-being and health. And, you know, if you like what you hear and want to dig a little bit deeper, by all means, spend some time with me. But let's dig into prevention a little bit today. You know, I talk a lot about addiction, and the couple things on this. First, let me set the table. Right now, today, right now in this country, we are at an all-time drug use high. I don't think people know that enough right now. I just think that headlines of overdoses kind of just make people's eyes roll back and they kind of go numb to it and really just don't tune in to the fact that right now, the world that we're living in right here in the United States of America, we are at an all-time drug use high, no pun intended. The last time we were close to this mark was 1979, right? So, Steve, what changed? Why are we using more drugs now? Well, the thing that works is prevention, right? There were concerted efforts, well-funded campaigns that were backed by Hollywood, government agencies, the private sector. Many people will remember the "This Is Your Brain on Drugs," right? We've even seen the DARE campaign, but the "This Is Your Brain on Drugs," the eggs cracked in the pan and the sizzle, or the person diving into the empty pool. I mean, those are those kind of jarring things that stood out to people. And what's really cool in what is so exciting about what we're doing with the new nonprofit that I've co-founded with our group is that prevention works, right? Let's look at Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That is a terrific job that organization has done to reduce drunk driving deaths. Let's go outside of addiction. Let's look at Smokey the Bear and forest fires, right? And what an outstanding job that campaign has done. Let's look at cigarettes. The reduction in cigarette smoking in this country has just been astronomical. So what is important is that when we set our mind to it and get behind a prevention campaign with consistent messaging that's well-funded and has a very clear and direct kind of goal at the end of that messaging, it works. And from 1979, when we were at that all-time high, we had then implemented very effective prevention strategies, and they were consistent, they were repeated, they were endorsed by all walks of life and all different sectors, and it was effective. And we drove it down by 65%. Now, think about that number. If we were to reduce homelessness, violent crime, whatever it is, pick kind of whatever social ill that is out there, and we reduce that by 65%, there would be parades thrown for the organizations that have done this, right? Well, that's what we were doing with prevention. And now, for a variety of reasons, the shifting of attitudes has changed around drugs and the drug culture and the acceptedness. I think I got that one right eventually. And that's just not okay. And now what has happened? We're back. We surpassed the 1979 number. We are now at an all-time high. And again, I just think people are either oblivious, don't hear, tune out, don't think it's going to impact them. And I'm here to say it's as high as it's ever been, and we've got to do something about it. And the other part is that prevention is the only 100% solution to addiction. If we can have folks never have to start, they are never going to have to suffer the consequences that go along with the addiction and all the behaviors that come from that, whether that's health, whether that's the family, whether that's the loss of job, finances. I mean, you name it, everything that kind of happens when you start down that path can be prevented if we can get clear on our messaging around prevention. And right now, it really is confusing in terms of, what the messaging is. I mean, from certain state and federal agencies, what you want to hear what the message that you're hearing? Use less, use slow, use with a friend. This harm reduction concept is what's being pushed out to people when really it should be the exact opposite. Don't use it all. No drug use is safe use. And there's no organization across the country that's really championing that message, and that's why we plan to be the singular voice to kind of bring prevention to the masses. It works. You just need to have a champion that's out there and that's going to be doing it. So I can't stress strongly enough that we need leaders in our community, and it starts really at home, though, who are having conversations with their kids, with their loved ones, saying, look, we understand the pressures that you're seeing that are out there. We understand that you're getting this from social media, from friends, from all these different areas. But in this house, this is a hard stop. This is a no. This is not even once type of thing. And really, it has to be such a strong line at home and in the messaging that we're going to be pushing out, because with the evolution of kind of drugs, I mean, what may have gone from marijuana to methamphetamine to cocaine to crack to heroin to crystal meth to OxyContin and now to fentanyl, this stuff is killing people by the tens and hundreds of thousands. I heard a statistic recently that just shocked me. Honestly, just shocked the heck out of me. And it was that we are having a September 11th style loss of life every single week in this country. That blew me away when I heard that number and kind of put in that framework. And I was just like, and how are we doing nothing? I mean, let's look at COVID, for example. Say what you want about masking and vaccinations and all of that stuff. The messaging was very clear and it was very prevalent, and that didn't kill nearly as many people as this drug crisis has been killing year after year, decade after decade. And we got behind that messaging as a country, as a nation, truthfully, and let it be known kind of what that messaging was. So my point is, when this country wants to get behind a message, it's out there to be had. And I really think that we need to stop, think, start to take prevention much more seriously as we kind of dig into this thing as a nation And I just wanted to make sure that we kind of talked about that a little bit as well too. So I wanted to start off the show talking about prevention. I just think it's that important. I also, I've talked about this in the past too. I do think the use of drug and alcohol screens is an important tool in prevention as well. Whether or not you actually want to drug or alcohol test your kids, just buying that box, whether it's ShareTech or whomever, setting it on the counter, and then having those conversations with your loved one. That is really important in kind of the effort of prevention, because what it really does is gives that kid an out, right? It's like, hey, when they go out and they're sitting at that party, or they're sitting out in the desert or in that hotel room or at their friend's house when their parents are gone, and that joint comes around or that pill comes around, it's like, hey, guys, I'd love to. I just can't, right? I just can't. So, okay, just wanted to come out swinging and talk a little bit about prevention. I think it's really important. You're going to hear a little bit more around prevention from me and from our organization as we get ready to take our message to the market. And this is really going to be kind of a back to school kind of push. We do back to school supplies push and all this type of thing. I think there needs to be a back to school drug prevention message. And you can bet your bottom that Steve and the co-founders of our organization, we're going to bring that to you loud and clear. So shifting gears a little bit, I was recently listening to another podcast. I think hopefully any good podcast person would be listening to other podcasts and finding out what's good, what's not good, trending topics, style, format, all that kind of stuff. And I was recently listening one from Dennis Prager, who I'm a big fan of. You say what you want. If you don't like him, great. But I find there to be a lot of wisdom coming from him as an individual. And you can take or leave whatever you want, but I am a consumer of wisdom. And I just find him to be a great resource for that. And one of the conversations that he was having, and in a phrase that he said really stood out to me, and I wanted to explore it and kind of bring it up to this audience as well too, was talking about emotional depth. It really sparked something in me to start to think about, what is emotional depth? Do I have emotional depth? And now, as I have started going on dates and seeing people, you have these conversations on the dating apps, and when you're meeting people, it's like, okay, red flags, deal breakers, all this kind of stuff. One of the things that I've started to hone in on is I've kind of done a debrief or an autopsy on previous relationships in my life, is I think that I'm seeking someone who has emotional depth. And I'm going, okay, that's an attractive quality, but Steve, do you have emotional depth in your life as well too? And I think the answer is that I previously had not, but have now started to seek it more and are kind of peeling that back within my own life and kind of making sure that I have that before I kind of just say, yes, this is something that I want in a partner. This is something that I want in a relationship. This is something that's important to me. So as I always do in kind of prepping for the show, I'm like, okay, this concept of emotional depth, let's explore that a little bit. And I found an article that I want to talk about, and it's got really 7 points. It calls it kind of emotionally complex, but 7 signs your partner may not be emotionally complex. But I thought it was interesting. And the actual genesis for this, when Dennis Prager was talking about it, he'd recently had a pet pass, right? And I have 2 dogs. I have Biscuit and Lily, right? Biscuit's my old man. I think he turns 13 this month. He's a little Shih Tzu, no teeth. His tongue kind of hangs out of his mouth. He's super cute. And that dog means everything to me. That dog has seen me through 2 wives, wildly active addiction, staying up for days on end. Like, I wish that dog could write a book or contribute to the book that I'm writing to kind of fill in the gaps, and there are so many gaps. But it was also one of the first things and people that kind of taught me unconditional love. And it sounds silly that it came from a dog, but it absolutely did. And then I have my other little puppy whose name's Lily, and she's 2 years old, and she's a rescue. And I kind of rescued a rescue. My parents' dog had passed, and they adopted this dog at one of these events. And I don't think they necessarily should have adopted that dog as they travel and, different things like that. I knew when they adopted that dog, there was a high probability that I would be inheriting this little pup. And her name's Lily, and she's maybe a poodle and Maltese, but What she definitely is anxious. And, but they give you the little debrief on her background and things like that from the Humane Society. And I read her background and story, and just, she was, left for dead basically and abandoned and all of this other stuff. And it's just gut wrenching stuff. So, when they're like, hey, would you be willing to take Lily? And I was just like, yeah, absolutely. So, pets are near and dear to my heart. So I have 2 little ones, and they play with my daughter, and I don't know, it just feels more like a home. But all of that aside, what Dennis was talking about was that one of his dogs had just passed, and how interesting we are as human beings to knowingly take on animals, knowing that they will bring pain in our lives, right? Knowing that they will bring anguish and the sorrow that comes along with it. I look at my little Biscuit, who's 13 years old, and just go, and I don't even want to think about it. Like, I would start to cry up or tear up, and just the thought of not having that little face who sits in my lap staring back at me. But what is it about us as people that continually want to have that in our life, and the joy that brings? But he called it is that we were seeking emotional depth. And that really resonated with me. And that's why I started into my deep dive, because we're adopting these animals and bringing into our lives, and the emotions and the feelings, and they're there, and they love unconditionally, and they need up. And we know that they're going to pass, right? And we know that they're going to pass. And now, as someone who's, kind of closer to the end with one of my little guys, it's like, wow. But why do we do this? Why do we continue to sign? Because we want to experience the joy that comes along with some of those things. I don't want to live in some shallow little life. What I'm trying not to do is avoid pain, right? I want to seek I think it's Tennyson that said, I want to drink life to the lees, right? I want to soak every bit out of this thing. And my whole goal is not to avoid pain, and maybe I could avoid it a little bit better. I'd rather not get divorced again, right? That hasn't led to a lot of joy in my life. But I don't live in fear of these things, which is why I want to get back out when I'm emotionally ready to make sure that I find the next right person, so we don't do it as much for my daughter's sake than really for my sake. But I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to try and avoid pain. And I really think that that's something that comes along with pets and bringing them into our lives. We know that that's going to happen, but we choose to do it anyways. And I just think it's kind of a beautiful thing. And I think it's a great kind of example of this. But in terms of bringing it back to kind of relationships and the emotional depth, I thought this article was interesting. And it just wanted to call out a couple points specifically on kind of the emotional complexity and emotional depth. And I just think it's a really interesting topic. If you haven't thought about it in your own life, maybe if you're hearing this, spend a few minutes today or at night or wherever you get a couple minutes of quiet time and think about where you are at emotionally. And do you have kind of another layer to you? Are you operating at kind of that, I like to say it shallow or kind of skin deep level? As I was sitting in my therapist's office this week discussing things, because, I have stuff I need to process as well too. I'm like, before I even walked in the door, I'm like, okay, let's make sure that we're not just talking about things I like and don't like. It's like, this is time to dig, right? This is time to dig in a little bit deeper. It's fine to kind of hit the surface level stuff, but let's look at the feelings underneath whatever that is. What's causing that feeling of anger or frustration or ego or disappointment? Let's dig into that. Let's go one step below of just that I feel bad or I feel sad, and find out what's really getting at in kind of creating those emotions or stirring them up for you. So again, title of the article is 7 Signs Your Partner May Not Be Emotionally Complex. And the first point that they talk about is they have a hard time expressing mixed emotions. And I thought the most important sentence out of this article is the ability to hold complex mixed emotions is vital to healthy psychological development. And again, that one struck me as well too, because I'm like, when I get into an emotional situation, I can get into anger very quickly. That's kind of been a hallmark of, when I was in active addiction, something that I continue to work on. post all of this, all of, getting sober. And again, we're going on 9 years removed from that. And I still talk about it to my therapist to this day and make sure that we understand it. But that's a singular emotion. So being able to hold these complex mixed emotions in my mind and be able to balance those, I thought it was really well said. So they have a hard time expressing mixed emotions. I just thought that was really an interesting thing. And if you're not emotionally complex, that they may not be able to hold more than one good or bad emotion at a time. You really should be able to hold both of those if we're going for that kind of emotional depth and that emotional complexity that I think is important, that I think a lot of us would like to have. And many of us maybe think that we do already have that. But I would challenge you as you listen to that and kind of hear some of these things to digest it and take a good hard look and see if you think that that's actually what you're able to do. Number 2 is they avoid intimate conversations, right? This is a really interesting one for me. Like, as I start dating and starting to meet folks and having conversations, it's like, okay, what type of conversations, and I'm not saying intimate has to happen on the first date, but can they keep a good conversation? Is it just so shallow? Or can we dig a little bit deeper? Are they willing or vulnerable to have the ability to talk about things maybe a touch deeper? And what I'm also doing this time around, as it kind of pertains to dating, is saying exactly what I'm looking for in the relationship, or how I am as well too. I think in the past, and I don't think I'm alone in this, like we may say things that paint us in a better light.